The fluorescent lights of Axiom Technologies hummed their familiar drone as I swiped my badge at 6:47 a.m., same as every morning for the past 4 years. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I'd learned long ago that being first in meant nothing when you're the only black engineer in a sea of khakis and boat shoes. But I did it anyway. Excellence was my armor, even when it went unnoticed. My desk sat in the corner of the open floor plan, strategically positioned, or so I'd been told during onboarding, to maximize collaboration. What it really maximized was my visibility to anyone who wanted to check if I was actually working. I'd catch them sometimes, the sideways glances from across the room, the way conversations would pause when I walked to the coffee machine. 4 years, and I was still being watched like a shoplifter in a department store. That Monday started like any other. I was deep into the neural processing algorithm I'd been developing for the past 18 months, a machine learning system that could predict equipment failures before they happened. It was my baby, my masterpiece. I'd written every line of code, solved every problem, worked through countless weekends and holidays. The patent application sat on my desk, ready for final review before submission. My name was on every page. Marcus Thompson, lead developer. Marcus, my man! I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Derek Whitmore, VP of Engineering, had a way of making every greeting sound like he was surprised to see me still employed. He was the kind of guy who played golf with the CEO on weekends and somehow always smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. "Morning, Derek," I said, minimizing my screen out of habit. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I'd learned that anything visible on my monitor could become someone else's idea by lunch. "Listen, I need you in conference room B in about 20 minutes. We've got some restructuring news, and Richard wants to make sure everyone's on the same page." Richard Ashworth was the CEO, Derek's old college roommate, and the man who'd built Axiom from a startup in his garage to a $100 million enterprise. I'd met him exactly 3 times in 4 years, once at my interview, once at the company Christmas party when he mistook me for the catering staff, and once in the elevator when he asked me which floor my department was on. I was the lead engineer on the company's most promising project. "Restructuring?" I asked. Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just some exciting changes, you'll see." He walked away before I could ask anything else, stopping to clap another engineer, white, fresh out of Stanford, 6 months on the job, on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "Tyler, great work on that presentation last week." "You buddy, really sharp stuff." Tyler had presented my analysis, my data, my conclusions. I'd sent it to Derek for review, and somehow Tyler had delivered it to the board while I was mysteriously left off the meeting invite. When I'd mentioned it to Derek afterward, he'd frowned and said, "Are you sure?" "I thought you were copied on that. Anyway, what matters is the team gets the credit, right? We're all in this together." We were not all in this together. Conference room B was already filling up when I arrived. I took a seat near the back, next to Sandra Chen from legal, one of the few people in this building who'd ever treated me like an actual colleague. She was Asian American, and while our experiences weren't identical, there was an unspoken understanding between us, a recognition of what it meant to constantly prove you belonged. "You hear anything about this?" she whispered. "Just that it's restructuring." Her expression told me she knew as much as I did, which was nothing. Richard Ashworth entered with the energy of a man who'd never been told no. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of distinguished that gets CEOs on magazine covers. Behind him came Derek, and behind Derek, someone I didn't recognize. Young, maybe 24 or 25. Blonde hair, expensive watch, the kind of confident stride that comes from never having to earn anything. "Good morning, everyone," Richard began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth executives learn at leadership seminars. "I'll keep this brief because I know you all have important work to get back to." As you know, Axiom is entering a critical growth phase. The Prometheus project, my project I thought, is on track for a major investor presentation next month, and we need all hands on deck. He paused for effect. To that end, I'm pleased to announce some changes to our leadership structure. First, Derek will be transitioning to a new role as Chief Strategy Officer, polite applause, and taking over as VP of Engineering. Please welcome my nephew, Bradley Ashworth. The blonde kid stepped forward with a smile that probably worked wonders at yacht clubs and country clubs and whatever other clubs his family belonged to. I felt Sandra's hand touch my arm, a gentle warning to control my expression. Richard continued. Bradley comes to us from MIT with a master's in business administration and a passion for technology. He'll be overseeing all engineering operations, including the Prometheus project. My project, the algorithm I'd built from nothing. The patent with my name on it, now reporting to a kid with an MBA and a famous last name. I know Bradley will be reaching out to each of you individually to get up to speed, Richard said. I have full confidence in his abilities, and I expect everyone to give him the same support and respect you've given Derek. Thank you. The meeting dissolved into the usual post-announcement chaos. People clustering around Bradley to introduce themselves, to shake his hand, to begin the performance of enthusiasm that corporate survival demanded. I stayed in my seat. Sandra leaned close. Don't. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking. Just don't, not yet. She was right. She was always right. But knowing that didn't stop the heat spreading through my chest. The familiar burn of watching less qualified people leapfrog over me while I did the actual work. Bradley made his way around the room, shaking hands, making small talk. When he reached me, his smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker so quick anyone else might have missed it. But I'd spent my whole life reading those flickers. You must be Marcus, he said, recovering quickly. Uncle Rich mentioned you. Said you're quite the coder. 4 years as lead engineer on a project worth tens of millions. And I was quite the coder. Lead engineer on Prometheus, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I developed the core algorithm. Right. He nodded like I'd told him something vaguely interesting. We should definitely sync up soon. I've got some ideas about the project direction I'm excited to share. Ideas. He'd been in the building for 15 minutes, and he already had ideas about the project I'd built from scratch. Looking forward to it, I said. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the patent application on my kitchen table. 18 months of my life, distilled into 47 pages of technical specifications and legal language. My name was on every page. My work, my innovation. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Proud of you, son. Your grandmother would be too. He didn't know about Bradley yet. I hadn't told him. How do you explain to a man who worked 30 years at the post office, who never got the promotions he deserved, who watched younger white men become his supervisors again and again, that history was repeating itself with his son? I'd done everything right. Perfect grades, perfect attendance, never complained, never made waves, built something genuinely revolutionary. Something that could change entire industries, and now a kid whose only qualification was sharing DNA with the CEO was going to take credit for all of it. I thought about quitting. I thought about it a lot. But then what? Walk away from my work? Let them erase my contributions entirely? That wasn't victory, that was surrender. And I was tired of surrendering. The next 3 weeks were an exercise in humiliation. Bradley scheduled daily sync meetings where he'd ask basic questions about the algorithm, questions that revealed he had no understanding of machine learning, neural networks, or anything beyond the buzzwords he'd learned in business school. But he asked them with such confidence, such authority, that people nodded along like he was imparting wisdom. So this algorithm, he said during one particularly painful session, it basically just predicts stuff, right? Like a fortune teller, but for machines. I took a breath. It's a predictive maintenance system using deep learning to analyze equipment performance patterns. It can identify potential failures up to 6 weeks before they occur, saving companies millions in downtime and repairs. Right, that's what I said. Fortune telling for machines. He laughed at his own joke. No one else did, but he didn't seem to notice. Anyway, I've been thinking, when we present to the investors, we should simplify the technical stuff. Nobody wants to hear about algorithms and neural whatever. They want to hear about ROI. I wanted to tell him that our investors specifically wanted technical details because they were technology investors. I wanted to tell him that dumbing down the presentation would make us look unprepared. I wanted to tell him a lot of things. Instead, I said, I'll prepare both versions. Good man. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a claim of ownership than camaraderie. I knew you'd be a team player. Team player, the phrase they used when they wanted you to work while they took credit. The microaggressions escalated. Bradley started forgetting to invite me to meetings about my own project. When I showed up anyway, I'd learned to watch the conference room calendars. He'd look surprised. Oh, Marcus. Didn't realize this was relevant to your level. My level. I was the lead engineer. He was an MBA with a family connection, but somehow I was the one whose presence needed justification. Then came the incident with the presentation. We were 3 weeks out from the investor meeting, and I'd been working around the clock on the technical demonstration. The code was flawless. I'd tested it 1,000 times. The visual interface was clean, intuitive, exactly what we needed to impress people who wrote million-dollar checks. I sent the final version to Bradley for review. What happened next still makes my jaw tight when I think about it. The next morning, I arrived to find Bradley presenting my demonstration to the executive team. My slides, my code, my interface, with his name on every page. The breakthrough came to me last weekend, he was saying as I walked in. I was thinking about the predictive model, and I realized we could streamline the neural processing to reduce latency by 40%. That was my breakthrough. My realization. I documented it in my development notes weeks ago, notes that Bradley had requested for his review. He saw me in the doorway and didn't miss a beat. Ah, Marcus, thanks for implementing my ideas so quickly. Really appreciate you handling the coding side. The coding side, like I was a typist. Like I'd just transcribed his genius instead of creating everything from scratch. I opened my mouth to speak, but Derek, standing behind me now, put a hand on my shoulder. Why don't we let Bradley finish? We can discuss attribution later. Attribution? Like it was negotiable, like my name on the patent was just a suggestion. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I created a backup of everything, every email, every development note, every version history log, every timestamp that proved who built what and when. I encrypted it and stored it in 3 separate locations. Because I'd seen this movie before, I knew how it ended for people who looked like me. And this time, I wasn't going to let them rewrite the script. The evidence started as self-defense, but the more I gathered, the more I found. I'd installed a timestamp logging system months earlier. Just good development practice, I told myself then. A way to track my own progress and protect my work. Now it was becoming something else. Every time Bradley claimed one of my ideas, every time he presented my code as his own, the logs told the real story. Date stamps didn't lie. Version histories didn't forget. But the timestamps were just the beginning. 2 weeks before the investor presentation, Sandra caught me in the break room at 7 a.m. before anyone else arrived. "You need to see something," she said, her voice low. "But you didn't hear it from me." "Hear what?" She glanced around, then slid a folded paper into my hand. "I was doing the standard IP audit for the investor meeting. Routine stuff, making sure all our patents are properly filed. Documentation is in order. She paused. Marcus, there's a second patent application. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean, someone filed an amended version of your Prometheus patent. Same technical specifications, same claims, but the inventor attribution is different. I unfolded the paper. The words blurred for a moment before coming into focus. Patent application amendment, predictive maintenance system using neural processing. And there, where my name should have been, Bradley Ashworth, sole inventor. They can't do this, I said. The original application was mysteriously lost in the filing system. This amended version is dated 3 days ago. If it goes through, the intellectual property belongs to Bradley, to the Ashworth family. 20 years of my father's voice echoed in my head. They'll take everything if you let them. They always do. I looked at Sandra. Why are you showing me this? Because I've been at this company for 8 years. Her expression was hard. Because I've watched Derek take credit for other people's work since I got here. Because I saw what they did to James Park 3 years ago when he tried to fight back. She paused. And because some things are just wrong, and I'm tired of pretending they're not. James Park. The name rang a bell, a former engineer who'd left suddenly. Supposedly for personal reasons. I'd heard whispers about a settlement, an NDA, but nothing concrete. What happened to James? He developed an encryption protocol that Derek presented to the board as his own. When James pushed back, he was suddenly facing HR complaints about his attitude and hostility. They built a paper trail, then forced him out. Last I heard, the NDA prevents him from working anywhere in the industry for 5 years. The familiar chill ran down my spine. I'd seen this playbook before, not just here, but everywhere. Build the case before the victim even knows they're a target. Document every minor infraction, real or invented. Create the narrative that they were always a problem, that their termination was inevitable. So, what do I do? Sandra's voice dropped even lower. I didn't say this. But if someone were to file an IP dispute with the patent office before that amendment processes, the original timestamp records would become relevant. Very relevant. She was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with the folded paper and a decision that would change everything. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I dug. The thing about corporate systems is that they assume employees don't pay attention. They assume we won't notice when meeting invites disappear from our calendars, when files move to folders we can't access, when approval chains get modified without notification. But I'd built systems like these. I knew their weaknesses. By 3 a.m., I'd found more than I expected. The amended patent application was just the surface. Beneath it was a pattern, a systematic effort to erase me from my own work. My name had been removed from project documentation dated back 6 months. My contributions to development meetings had been attributed to various team members. My code commits were still visible in the version control, but someone had changed the author tags to B. Ashworth on all the major breakthroughs. Someone, Bradley, Derek, maybe both, was rewriting history. And they'd been doing it for months. I photographed everything. Screenshots of timestamps, version histories showing the original author tags, email chains proving I'd developed key features before Bradley even joined the company. I documented the pattern of erasure, the methodical removal of my name from everything I'd built. And then I found something else. Axiom Technologies had 3 major investors, each holding significant equity in the company. For the past 2 years, Richard Ashworth had been telling them that Prometheus was on track for a Q4 launch, a timeline that was technically impossible given the development status when he made those claims. He'd been showing them fake progress reports, inflated projections, documentation that didn't match reality. In other words, fraud, securities fraud specifically. The investor meeting next month wasn't just about securing additional funding. It was about maintaining a lie that Richard had been building for years. And now Bradley was being positioned to take credit for the project because when Prometheus succeeded, the family needed to control the narrative. They needed their name on the innovation, not mine. I wasn't just being erased from my work. I was being erased because my work was the only thing keeping their house of cards standing. The next 2 weeks were a performance. I showed up every day, attended Bradley's condescending meetings, implemented his suggestions that were just my own ideas, repackaged with simpler vocabulary. I smiled when he took credit. I nodded when he explained my algorithm back to me incorrectly. I played the role they expected, the quiet black engineer who knew his place. Meanwhile, I was building something else entirely. I'd found the contact information for Axiom's lead investor, Margaret Chen, no relation to Sandra, a venture capitalist known for her technical due diligence and zero tolerance for founder fraud. Through LinkedIn and careful research, I learned she'd built her reputation on exposing exactly the kind of deception Richard was practicing. I drafted an email, then deleted it. Drafted another, deleted that too. This wasn't something to do impulsively. If I came forward with accusations and couldn't back them up, I'd be the one destroyed. The angry black man making unfounded claims against a respected CEO. I'd seen that narrative too many times to count. The victim becomes the villain. The whistleblower becomes the problem. I needed everything airtight, unquestionable, so bulletproof that no amount of spin could deny it. I started with the patent discrepancy. The original application was filed on March 15th. I had the confirmation email in my archives, forwarded to my personal account the day I submitted it. The amended application was dated August 3rd, with Bradley listed as sole inventor, despite the fact that he didn't join the company until May. The timestamps told a clear story. I built this. He stole it. But timestamps could be disputed. System errors could be invented. So I dug deeper. Every commit I'd ever made to the Prometheus codebase was logged with my employee ID. The version control system was built on an immutable blockchain, a security feature I'd implemented myself to protect against exactly this kind of tampering. Bradley could change author tags, but the underlying cryptographic signatures remained. Anyone who knew where to look could prove who really wrote what. I knew where to look. I also documented the investor fraud. Screen captures of the progress reports Richard had submitted versus the actual development status at those dates. Email chains where Derek acknowledged we were behind schedule, while Richard was telling investors we were ahead of projections. The gap between the internal reality and external communications was damning. By the end of the second week, I had 847 pages of documentation, every claim supported by evidence, every accusation backed by receipts. And then Bradley made his fatal mistake. 3 days before the investor presentation, he called a team alignment meeting. Just him, me, and 2 junior developers who worshipped the ground his family walked on. I should have known something was wrong when he asked us to leave our phones outside the room. To minimize distractions, he said with that smooth smile. So Marcus, he began once the door closed, I wanted to discuss your role going forward. My role in the Prometheus project and at Axiom generally. He leaned back in his chair with studied casualness. You've been a valuable team member. Really invaluable with the technical details. 18 months of my life reduced to technical details. But I've been thinking, he continued, that as we move into the commercialization phase, we need people who can communicate more effectively with stakeholders, people who can represent the company's values. The implication hung in the air. I wasn't the right image, wasn't the right face, wasn't the right color. What exactly are you suggesting? I kept my voice flat, controlled. Don't give them ammunition. A transition We're creating a new position, technical implementation specialist. You'd still work on the project, but more in a supportive capacity. Behind the scenes, invisible, where they wanted me. And the investor presentation? I'll handle that. The board and I agree. We need someone who can speak their language. Their language. Wealthy, white, connected. What about the patent? I asked. My name is on the filing. Something flickered across Bradley's face. Surprise? Maybe, or alarm. He hadn't expected me to bring that up. The patent is under review, he said carefully. Legal is making some adjustments to ensure proper attribution to the project team. The project team. I let the words sit there. Meaning you. Meaning everyone who contributed. His smile turned cold. But as lead inventor, yes, the primary attribution will reflect my oversight of the project. He was admitting it. Right there, in front of two witnesses, too blinded by ambition to understand what they were hearing. He was confessing to stealing my work, my innovation, my name. I stood up slowly. I'll need some time to consider this new position. Of course. His smile returned, warmer now, confident. He thought he'd won. Take the weekend, but I'll need your answer before the investor meeting Monday. You'll have it, I said. What I didn't say, you'll have more than you bargained for. That night I made 2 copies of everything. One went to a secure cloud server under an encrypted alias. The other went to a safety deposit box at a bank across town. Evidence, documentation, everything I'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. Then I wrote the email to Margaret Chen, subject line, Urgent, Material Misrepresentations in Axiom Technologies, Investor Communications. I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything, but it was ready. Monday morning, I walked into the Axiom building for what I knew might be the last time as an employee. The investor presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. Bradley had been rehearsing all weekend, polishing his delivery of lies built on my work. But I had a presentation of my own, prepared. At 9:47 a.m., I sent the email to Margaret Chen. At 9:52 a.m., I sent a follow-up, a link to a secure document repository containing every piece of evidence I'd collected. At 9:58 a.m., I walked into the conference room where Bradley stood at the front, adjusting his slides, preparing to perform the role of genius inventor. The investors weren't there yet. Just Bradley, Derek, Richard, and the junior engineers who'd sat silent while my career was dismantled. Marcus, Richard looked surprised to see me. Bradley said you were taking a personal day. I changed my mind. I took a seat near the back. Wouldn't miss this for the world. Bradley's smile flickered. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what. That uncertainty, the first crack in his confidence, was more satisfying than I'd expected. At 10:00 a.m. exactly, the door opened. Margaret Chen entered first, followed by 2 other investors and their technical advisors. The presentation was about to begin, but the real show wouldn't start until the questions began. Bradley launched into his presentation with the practiced ease of someone who'd never had to earn anything. The slides were polished, professional, my work dressed in his name, my algorithms translated into buzzwords that board members could pretend to understand. The Prometheus system represents a paradigm shift in predictive maintenance, he said, gesturing at the screen. Using proprietary neural processing techniques that I developed over the past 2 years, we've achieved unprecedented accuracy in failure prediction. 2 years. The project was 18 months old, and he'd been here for 4 months. But he said it with such conviction that the junior investors were already nodding along. Margaret Chen sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. She'd acknowledged my email with a single word, received, nothing else. I had no idea if she'd looked at the evidence, if she believed me, if she was going to do anything at all. Maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe she was Richard's friend. Maybe I'd just handed my career to someone who would bury the truth like everyone else. But then she raised her hand. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, and there was something in her tone that made Bradley's smile falter. "I have a few technical questions before we continue." "Of course," he recovered quickly, happy to dive deeper. "The neural processing architecture you described, the layered approach to failure pattern recognition. Can you walk us through the implementation?" I watched Bradley's face. This was the moment. Either he knew my work well enough to fake it or... "Absolutely," he said. "So the implementation basically involves processing the data through several layers of the neural network, which then identifies patterns that indicate potential failures." "Yes. But specifically," Margaret leaned forward, "which activation functions did you use in the hidden layers? How did you address the vanishing gradient problem in the deeper networks?" Bradley's smile froze. These were fundamental technical questions, things any real developer of the system would know instantly. I'd chosen ReLU activation functions specifically because they mitigated gradient issues. I documented my reasoning in my development notes, the notes Bradley had supposedly reviewed. The technical specifications are quite detailed," he said. "I focused more on the conceptual architecture, while my team handled the implementation particulars." "Your team?" Margaret glanced down at something in her lap. A tablet. I realized, probably displaying the documents I'd sent. "By team, do you mean Marcus Thompson, the engineer listed as the original inventor on the patent application filed in March?" The room went still. Richard Ashworth sat up straighter. Derek's face had gone pale. Bradley looked like he'd been slapped. "I'm sorry," Richard interjected, his voice tight with forced calm, "but I'm not sure where you're getting your information. Bradley has been the driving force behind Prometheus since its inception." "Really?" Margaret turned to face him directly. "Because I have documentation suggesting otherwise." Development notes time-stamped months before Bradley joined the company, version control logs with cryptographic signatures proving who wrote what code and when, and an amended patent application filed in August that attempts to remove Mr. Thompson's name from work he provably created. She held up her tablet. "Would you like to see the evidence?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. "This is ridiculous," Bradley finally sputtered. "Marcus is a coder. I directed the project. Any contributions he made were under my guidance." "Your guidance?" Margaret's voice was ice. "You weren't employed here when half this code was written." "The timestamps prove that, unless you're suggesting you directed Mr. Thompson's work from the future." "Margaret," Richard stood up, his CEO smile firmly in place. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. Why don't we take a short break to sort this out?" "Oh, I don't think we need a break," she gestured to her technical advisors. "My team has spent the weekend reviewing the documentation Mr. Thompson provided. We've also compared it against the progress reports you've been sending us for the past 2 years. Richard's smile flickered. "Would you like to explain," Margaret continued, "why those reports claim Prometheus was ahead of schedule in March of last year, when your internal communications clearly show the project was significantly delayed? Or why projected revenue figures you provided were based on deployment timelines that your own engineering team said were impossible? Those were optimistic projections, standard practice in..." "Fraud," Margaret cut him off. "The word you're looking for is fraud. Materially misrepresenting project status and financial projections to secure investment is securities fraud, Mr. Ashworth." The room exploded. The other investors were on their feet, demanding explanations. Derek was backing toward the door, like he could somehow escape what was happening. Bradley had gone the color of curdled milk, and Richard Ashworth, who'd built this company on his charm and his confidence and his willingness to let other people do the work while he took the credit, looked for the first time since I'd known him genuinely afraid. I sat in my chair and watched it all unfold. 4 years of swallowed anger, of microaggressions absorbed, of excellence ignored, and contributions erased. It all came down to this moment, not a dramatic confrontation or an angry outburst, just truth, just evidence, just the quiet, devastating power of documented facts. Margaret approached me after the chaos had subsided somewhat. The other investors had demanded an immediate audit. Legal counsel had been called. Richard was in the corner with his lawyers, his face grey. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not looking closer sooner. I've worked with Richard for years. I trusted his reports." She shook her head. "That's on me. But I want you to know, the evidence you provided isn't just going to protect your patent, it's going to reshape this entire company. I'm not sure I'll have a company to be part of after today." "No," she smiled for the first time. "You'll have something better. Axiom as it exists under Richard's leadership is done. But the technology, your technology, that's worth billions to the right buyer, and whoever acquires those assets is going to want the person who actually built them." I let that sink in. After years of being told I should be grateful for what I had, of being reminded that opportunities like this don't come often for people like me, of swallowing my pride and lowering my expectations, someone was finally seeing my worth. But I had one more thing to say. "Ms. Chen," I stopped her before she walked away. "The patent, my name, will be restored," she said firmly. "The amended filing was fraudulent. We'll make sure the original application is processed correctly. Marcus Thompson, sole inventor, as it should have been from the start." The rest of that day blurred together. Security escorted Bradley out of the building after he was formally suspended pending investigation. Derek resigned before he could be fired, which didn't stop the SEC inquiry that would follow him for years. Richard was removed as CEO by emergency board action, his shares frozen, his legacy crumbling. I cleaned out my desk that evening, not because I'd been fired, but because I needed to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by 4 years of gaslighting and theft. The interim leadership asked me to stay, begged me. Actually, but I'd already made my decision. Sandra found me in the parking garage. "I heard what happened," she said. "Everyone's heard. Thank you." The words felt inadequate for everything she'd risked. "If you hadn't shown me that amended patent, you would have found it yourself eventually. You're not someone who misses things," she smiled. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it'll be mine, my work, my name, my terms." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. I drove home through streets I'd traveled 1,000 times before, but everything looked different. Not better or worse, just different. Clearer somehow, like I was seeing the world without the film of accommodation and compromise I'd been looking through for years. My father called that night. Word travels fast, apparently. Someone who knew someone had seen the news about Axiom's leadership upheaval, and he'd put the pieces together. "You did this?" he asked. "I just told the truth." "Boy," his voice cracked. "Do you know how long I've waited to hear those words? How long I've wanted to see someone like you, someone like us, win one?" I didn't have an answer. What do you say to a man who spent 30 years watching others take credit for his work, who swallowed his pride every day to provide for his family, who taught you to keep your head down because raising it meant getting it knocked off? "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "Your grandmother would be proud. And your mother." He paused. "She always said you'd do something that mattered, that you'd change things. I don't know if I changed anything. You changed everything, maybe not the whole world, but everything that matters." We talked for another hour, about the case, about my plans, about what it meant to be a black man in America who'd actually been believed. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years. And by the end of it, something that had been tight in my chest for as long as I could remember had finally started to loosen. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in San Francisco, accepting an award for innovation in predictive maintenance technology. The Prometheus patent had been restored to my name. The system I built was being implemented across industries, saving companies millions, proving that the work I'd done had real value. But that wasn't why I'd accepted the invitation to speak. When I started in this industry, I began, looking out at the audience of engineers and executives, I was told to keep my head down, to be grateful for opportunities, to not make waves. I paused. I spent 4 years at a company where my work was stolen, my contributions erased, my name removed from things I built with my own hands. And for most of that time, I believed that's just how it was, that fighting back was pointless, that the system was too big to challenge. The room was silent. I was wrong. The system isn't too big. It's just been protected by our silence, by our willingness to accept less than we deserve because we've been told that's all we can expect. I looked directly at the handful of black and brown faces scattered through the crowd. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Your work matters. Your name matters. Your story matters. And anyone who tries to erase those things doesn't deserve your silence. They deserve your truth. Afterward, a young black engineer approached me. He couldn't have been more than 23, fresh out of school, with the same guarded expression I remembered wearing at his age. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I've been dealing with something at my company, similar to what you described. I keep thinking I should just let it go, but it's eating you alive." He nodded. "Document everything," I said. "Every email, every meeting, every instance where your work is misattributed or your contributions are ignored. Build your case quietly, completely, until it's undeniable. And when you're ready, when the evidence speaks for itself, let the truth do the fighting for you. And if they retaliate, they probably will. That's the risk." I put my hand on his shoulder. "But living with the alternative, watching yourself disappear piece by piece while they take everything you built, that's not living. That's just surviving. And you deserve more than survival." He thanked me and walked away, and I hoped something I'd said would stick. That's all any of us can do. Plant seeds and trust that something will grow. I think about that a lot now. About seeds and growth and the long, slow work of change. Richard Ashworth is facing federal charges that will likely end his career and possibly his freedom. Bradley took a job at his father's company, where he'll probably fail upward for the rest of his life, but not at my expense. Derek's consulting firm collapsed when word spread about his role in the fraud. And me? I started my own company. Small, for now. A team of engineers who look like America. Black, white, Asian, Latino, women and men, all of them brilliant. All of them treated like their contributions matter, because they do. My grandmother used to say that justice delayed isn't justice denied. It's just justice testing your patience. I never understood what she meant until now. "The arc of the moral universe is long," Dr. King said, "but it bends toward justice." What he didn't mention is that sometimes you have to do the bending yourself. I still drive past the Axiom building sometimes. New name now, new management, new logo. But I don't feel anything when I see it. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. That chapter is closed. What I feel is something else. Something my father finally named for me in one of our conversations after everything settled down. "You know what you did?" he asked. "What? You proved them wrong. Not just Richard and Bradley and all of them. You proved wrong every person who ever told us that we couldn't win. Every voice that said the game was rigged too tight for us to beat. You showed that a black man with the truth on his side can bring down anyone." He paused. "That's not revenge, son. That's revolution. One truth at a time." I think about his words every morning when I walk into my own building, see my own name on the door, build something that belongs entirely to me. The work continues. The fight continues, but for the first time in my life I'm fighting on my own terms, and that makes all the difference. My name is Marcus Thompson. I am an engineer, an inventor, and a black man in America. They tried to erase me. They failed. This is my story, and I finally got to write the ending.